Welcome to the Brave Feminine Leadership interview series, where I get to join global leaders and we get to get right into all of their wisdom and insight into all things life and leadership. And today I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Terry Tateossian to the conversation. Terry, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Melissa, for having me. It's my absolute pleasure.
So I'm going to touch on your bio so our audience know who I'm talking to, and then we're going to get into your amazing story, which I know is going to be incredibly valuable for our listeners. So Terry's a fitness and lifestyle coach, a personal trainer, nutritionist, hormone specialist, emotional eating coach, and a podcast host. Terry's a successful entrepreneur, a mother of two teenagers, and a leading advocate for healthy living. Terry is passionate about sharing her story of losing over 80 pounds in her mid 40s and helping empower others to make positive changes in their lives, no matter the age. Well, Terry, you've instantly got all of our attention. Let's get right into your story. So, for the audience who haven't come across you before, who are you firstly as a human being? And then let's get into your journey.
That's a loaded question. I love it. Who am I as a human being? Well, I'm an ever-evolving human being that is constantly looking to reinvent, restructure, improve, to grow. And I'm very open to possibilities of what that might mean, which was one of the challenges I had in my 30s and early 40s, where I was very much kind of entrenched in my own identity of being a business owner and what that meant and what that lifestyle entailed. And so once I realized that I could change, I could break the chains of that particular imprisonment in a sense. The possibilities were endless, and they were very much open to doing anything I desired, truly. And so that's in a nutshell how I would describe myself. My career started in my early 20s. I completed university with a computer science engineering degree. I worked in the tech field for 2 decades. Eventually, I ended up starting my own agency, which was a technology and marketing agency. And I ended up growing it to about 40 employees, to quite a bit of consultants and contractors. And it involved 24-hour a 24-hour work ethic. When I say 24-hour, I was delivering my first child. I had, I think, just given birth, and I was in the hospital bed working on my BlackBerry because there were no days off. It was that type of lifestyle.
Yeah, wow. So let's go then to what was the catalyst? I hear you say that, you realized that you could actually change that narrative and I guess that imprisonment, if you like. It was the words that you used. What was the catalyst for that?
Well, over time, so in my early teenage years and in my 20s, I was not overweight. I was never really overweight. But once I started being a business owner and then started having children, I started gaining uncontrollable amounts of weight. And so I kept getting heavier and heavier each year. And no matter what I did, no matter what I tried, what diet I did, what program I did, it didn't matter. I would lose a little bit of weight and then I would gain more weight, regain not just the weight that I lost, but I would regain more on top of that. And I was in this constant vicious cycle. And the thought pattern that was running in my mind was that it didn't really matter if I was overweight because I was a business owner. Nobody really cared about what I looked like. Nobody cared about that I was overweight as long as I could deliver the work. And having children and a family and, all the things that we juggle as women in our midlife, during our most busiest career times in our years, it was never a priority. So it always fell on the back burner. until one day I ended up in the hospital because I thought I was having a heart attack.
Okay.
And that's where it all began, right? So now I had two little kids, I had a business, I had a lot of clients that relied on me, and here I was completely knocked out, and I could not work from the hospital bed in that in that situation. And so I had to change something.
So what did you do?
Nothing.
I mean, it makes it sound easy in terms of, and so I changed something. But we all know that's not easy. But what did you do? Where did you start?
Well, the first hospital visit, after the first hospital visit, I was convinced, I was having heart palpitations. I was having all kinds of heart-related issues. I went to a cardiologist. They checked everything out. There were some minor issues, but nothing really that was that alarming. And they said, you probably need to change your lifestyle. And I said, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, whatever. I just kept going in the same way. And it wasn't just work. It was excessive sugar consumption,
Yeah.
excessive alcohol consumption,
Mhm.
being overweight, having no room in my life for me,
Mm.
always being on, right? So I remember there were phases and periods of time where I wouldn't sleep for 2, 3 nights in a row, either due to work deadlines or children, and all in combination together. And so I just kept going until I ended up in the hospital again, the second time.
How far apart were these two hospital visits?
About a year.
Okay. All right. So one hospital visit continued on, almost no changes. Second hospital visit.
That's when it started to come to me that, yeah, I had to sit down and have a conversation with myself and say, hey, is this what you want for yourself? You're 37 years old. You've now been hospitalized twice. They're discussing putting you on medication. You have pre-diabetic markers. You're borderline alcoholic and workaholic at the same time. You are extremely overweight. I was 210 pounds at the time, and I could barely go up a flight of stairs without feeling like I needed to go back into the hospital for the third time. And so it was just this never-ending cycle. And I really had to sit down with myself and say, okay, you need help. This is not something that you can't do on your own. You need to find somebody to help you. And so I reached out to a holistic doctor in my area in New Jersey. And I'll never forget that day because I was, first of all, baffled that the questionnaire, it was over the phone, the first intake questionnaire, it was 2 hours long.
Oh, wow.
And we discussed everything under the sun, going all the way back to my great grandmother's health and her health history, and what some of the events and occurrences had taken place in her lifetime, and then my grandmother and my mother, and then all the way to myself. And at the end of this conversation, the doctor said, wow, no wonder you're having all of these things happening to you.
Mm.
And in that moment, I realized that a lot of this was coming almost as a self-induced kind of reality. It was coming from being an extreme overachiever, having emotional trauma, having learned to use food and alcohol as a coping mechanism because I was so busy being busy. And most likely it was because I just did not know how to not be busy. And all of this combined was creating a perfect storm. High stress, high achiever, a lot of anxiety, coping with food and alcohol, never really sleeping well, not taking care of myself, lots of things like that. It was a recipe for future catastrophe, essentially.
This story is the story of so many of the female leaders that I hear. That line you just shared about being busy because I didn't know how to not be busy. Um, that is huge. I hear that all the time. And I remember looking at, my mum and my mother-in-law and sort of watching that they never sat down. Never sat down. There was always something else to do to keep going, keep going, keep going. So it's fascinating. So okay, so here you are. You've got this holistic doctor. You've had these conversations, and tell us what you think the most fundamental things were that you kind of had to learn as part of this or unlearn.
hmm Yeah, so the first thing I had to learn is to set a block of time in my calendar where I was going to perform these tasks that I set out to perform. And if you're a high achiever, you know, like when you have your task list, you have your marching orders, it's getting done. There's no doubt. And so what I decided back then, I did not know any better, but all I knew was that everything I tried before did not work. So that I think there were probably about 30 different diets I had tried, from keto to Atkins to South Beach to fruitarian to, I mean, you name it, I did it. None of them worked in my mind because they were extremely restrictive. And eventually my willpower would break and I would go right back to what I was doing before. And so I decided this time that I was going to eat what I love to eat, which was mostly protein, some healthy fats like avocados, feta cheese, salads, very big salads. I would make this enormous giant salad and eat that all day. I wouldn't stop eating all day. I would be chewing all day. And I started riding the Peloton. And at that time, the Peloton had just come out and there was a brand new gadget. And so I was like, all right, I'm getting on this Peloton. I'm going to do at least one class per day. Eventually, I started doing three classes per day. So
So you
I was
swapped
doing,
one busy for another busy.
I was on a mission. I was like, this, I'm getting this done. And so I remember the first Peloton class I did, it was 45 minutes. I cried the entire time. It was horrible. And then I just kept doing it. And kept eating my salads. And I ended up losing about 25 pounds and I got stuck, right? So I lost the 25 pounds and that was it. I could not lose anymore. And I had quite a bit more to go as I was 210 pounds. I'm 5'3", by the way, in case
Yeah,
anybody's
yeah.
wondering.
Lovely and petite.
And so I got stuck and I became panicked because my experience up to that point was that once I got stuck, I was going to revert back. I was going to boomerang right back and balloon up probably to 220, 230 pounds, who knows. And so I decided then that, okay, I have a holistic doctor and that helped me get here. So maybe I need to find more help. And I had a friend who had just competed in a bodybuilding competition. And I started looking at the competitors and I was thinking to myself, like, oh, wow, like that could never be me. I could never do such a thing. They're so lucky. They're genetically gifted. And then for whatever reason, as I was scrolling through the competitors, one of the competitors was a coach. And her specialty was weight loss for women over 40. So I must have stalked her for about a few months until I finally had enough courage to reach out and say, "Hey, can you help me? This is where I'm at." And she accepted me into her program, and I began learning about nutrition. This was about over 8 years ago. I think it was 39 going on 40 at the time. And I started learning macro nutrition. how to properly structure my daily caloric intake to be nutritious rather than just be in a caloric deficit, how to portion out enough protein throughout the day, how many meals to have, how to time them properly. And at that, and I always joke around because I was like, what in the world? Like, I need a PhD to figure out how to eat. I thought eating was
Yes.
easy.
Yes.
Like, nobody told me this stuff before. I was just eating random stuff, right? Or being completely malnutrition. So I was oscillating between overeating and being completely in a nutrition deficit, meaning even if I was in a caloric deficit, I was not getting any nutrients out of that. And so little by little, I learned how to structure a meal properly. How much protein, how many carbs, when to eat starch, how much fat, and so forth. And simultaneously, I had to learn how to lift weights with my coach. Now, coming from a complete beginner mindset, now think about this. I had never worked out before in my life. I had never gone to a gym. I did not know what a dumbbell was or how to use one. I was very much a beginner.
So, I mean, congratulations, because that became the foundation then to kind of unlock the rest of the weight loss, I assume. And so in total, that was 80 pounds. Did you end up competing in bodybuilding?
I am scheduled to do that this year.
Amazing. Amazing. I saw some of your Instagram posts, so I thought looking amazing, like you could definitely do that. Can I ask, I mean, there's so many different layers and elements to that, but I'm just going to start with the emotional eating side of it because I think, I know that that is a challenge for me throughout my life as well. So how do we stop that?
Mm. Well, the question is, can we stop eating emotionally? Because food in itself is an emotional kind of and physical type of activity, right? So when you're a food addict and you use food to cope with your internal state, it can get very tricky because your mind tends to convince you that you're physically hungry when in fact you are not. You are technically looking for a way to change your internal state. And food is an accepted coping mechanism where there's not any social stigma if you're using, in my case, it was a jar of Nutella or a pint of Haagen-Dazs every day, right? And so for a period of time, and it's a self-diagnosed type of thing, right? So it's very difficult to kind of nail it down that is what you're doing. But one of the first things is to become aware of the behavior pattern, right? So, for example, if you have been attempting to lose weight for a significant period of time, and in the very beginning, you're successful, you're doing great, everything is going really well. And all of a sudden, you fall off the wagon and you go in the complete opposite direction for no apparent reason, or some event triggers you into needing some type of a substance to cope with. And because food is deemed not as harmful,
Yeah.
although I dare argue that, as alcohol, cigarettes, and other hard drugs or other activities, women tend to do that quietly and silently when no one's watching. And that was my case. And so anytime my success was jeopardized by any type of stress or any event that was out of my control, my coping mechanism was to drown myself in a jar of Nutella. And that made me feel better in the moment, but the next day, not so much, right? And so I started noticing that that's what I do. That's what I'm doing. and it snowballs, right? So you fall off the wagon, you eat the entire jar of Haagen-Dazs, you feel fine in the moment. The next 2 hours, the shame thoughts start popping in. The next day, the negative self-talk kicks in into super high gear. The shaming, the judgment, you're never going to get this right. You're pointless, it's hopeless, it's pointless, and now you're completely off the wagon. So something that, should have maybe lasted 1 or 2 hours, now you're off the wagon for a week, maybe two, and then by the time you come back around, you've now gained 5 pounds. And so that's usually the cycle and the pattern that follows an emotional eating type of flare up.
So once you're aware of it, and I hear that in terms of the first step is to notice the behavior, how do you start changing that behavior?
So once you start noticing that that's what you're doing, and you start identifying the triggers. All right. So, for example, for alcoholics, many alcoholics cannot walk into a bar ever because just the fact of being in that environment is going to trigger them into ordering a drink. And so, with eating, it's a lot more difficult because we cannot remove food from our lives, right? The um the first step that I would identify is what are the foods that you tend to grab when the emotional trigger, when you're feeling that need, right? Because it's a very instant, urgent, immediate emergency feeling when you go to grab whatever it is. It's not an actual physical hunger. So, what are those foods? Number one. Number two is can you find a substitution for those foods that are less calorically dense? So, if it's ice cream, for example, can you find an ice cream and keep that around when the moment comes? That is higher in protein, lower in carbs, lower in fat. Can you maybe make an ice cream, right? So there's a lot of machines out there right now, like the Ninja Creamy machine, where you can make your own ice cream and you can precisely calculate for a big giant pint-sized container. You can use ingredients that will simulate the feeling you're looking for when you're going for that ice cream, but they will have 250 calories as opposed to 1,400 calories in a pint.
That's so interesting because you're not saying avoid the feeling and the what it is satisfying. You're just saying replace what you're getting that feeling from.
That's the second step,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so while you're doing that, start to pay attention. What is it that I'm feeling right now, and why do I feel that I need this particular soothing or coping mechanism? Right? So the first thing is triage, right? We have to take control of what's happening immediately, right? Because hoping that the trigger doesn't come or abstaining from it or waiting for us to heal ourselves, it didn't work for me. And I
Mm,
have not worked with anybody yet that it's worked for, okay? Because it's been there for so long,
mm.
right? This behavior has been there for so long. It's going to take time to unwrap it, to reprogram your mind. And so you need to give yourself a bridge, some solution in the interim while you're working on your emotional health to understand where this behavior is stemming from and why it's happening to you and why you're reaching for this thing. In the interim, you need to be in triage if you don't want to fall off your goal, right? Because it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And so while you have these measures put into place to replace these foods, you start to work on, interesting, right? So this happened and this is how I felt. And now I'm eating this amazing ice cream I prepared for myself in advance that's only 250 calories and it's not going to take me off my path. I'm not going to be guilty and feeling shame for the next 2 weeks. Tomorrow, I'm just going to go right back to exactly what I was doing because I didn't do anything that was going to take me away from what my goal is. You kind of give yourself the space to analyze some of these things a little bit. And you start to learn that, hey, I can prepare myself for the next time this wave comes over me. I'm not going to be adding fuel to the fire, right? Because you're already in an emotional state that's really urgent and you are looking for relief when you grab the Haagen-Dazs or the highly caloric option. Now you're adding shame, judgment, all kinds of more things on top of what you're already feeling, right? And so you give yourself a little bit of room to work through the emotions while staying true to your promises, while staying true to your goals, while showing up for yourself, and it'll give you enough time to kind of start processing and unpacking, why, which
Really,
can
I
take.
can take some time. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but one of the things that sort of runs through my head when I think about, and you've been there, right? So help people with this, macros. You said yourself before you need a PhD to work it out. And I'll be the first to say that's turned me off doing it before because it feels complicated to do it. And so I can hear the response from so many people, which is like, I'm already busy. Now you want me to spend time working all this stuff out. Help us with that.
It's actually very simple, very simple. And it's so simple. Once you get into that habit, your mind automatically starts looking for the solution. Now, here's the thing. When you hear yourself saying things like, I am too busy for this, or I'm already stressed out enough, this is just going to add more stress to my life. That's immediately, that's where I would stop and ask, why is it that you feel that properly fueling yourself, which will give you more energy, you're going to feel better, you're going to look better, you're going to actually show up in your professional life a lot happier, in your personal life a lot happier, and you're going to ensure that you're not nutritionally malnourished by the next latest fad diet. Why is that too much stress for you, right? So why is it that you don't have enough time in your life for yourself? Because the way that I equate nutrition is like medicine. It truly is. When you think about the pharmaceutical industry, what is their protocol? A certain dosage at a certain time for a specific ailment, right? Food works the same way. Now, as a matter of fact, the protein standard that's out there is almost a joke. The what they tell us that we're supposed to eat, which I believe is zero point 0.6 grams of protein per body pound, is a total joke. It's really outdated. So if you're following that, you're not doing yourself any favors. When you are not paying attention to your nutrition, you're not setting yourself up for a long, healthy lifespan, right? So that's okay, I guess, to have developing Alzheimer's, to be developing heart disease, to be developing metabolic diseases, to be developing cancer? Like, do you have time for that?
Having had breast cancer, I hear you. No, people don't have time for that. So, I hear you for sure. So, well, where do we go from there? Because what I hear there is a very realistic message of just accountability and realism in that, wait, you turned up, and you talked about it, and I think we all hear this about lifting weight is so important as part of this package at all as well. So if the food you eat, the dose at a certain time is like medicine for us, where do weights fit in?
Well, muscle, and there's so many studies out there. One book that I highly recommend is called Outlive by Peter Attia.
I've read it. It's fabulous.
It's just mine is so torn up. I've read it so many times. I have memorized the majority of the contents in the book. And what he says in one of the chapters is that muscle tissue is actually equivalent to a lot of pharmaceutical drugs. It's actually better, its efficacy when you have when you're properly muscled, adequately muscled, its efficacy is better than the majority of the pharmaceuticals that are out there that are made to treat different conditions. And he calls it the four horsemen, right? Metabolic disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and heart disease. When your body is properly muscled, which is achieved through proper resistance training with progressive overload and the proper intake of enough nutritional protein, carbs, and fat in the right combinations, you have the potential to achieve the most optimal health for you, right? So everybody's different genetically. Everyone has a different body composition and so forth. But for your own personal biochemistry, your own personal biological body, you are giving yourself the best chance to live a long lifespan that is healthy. So a healthier lifespan. And progressive overload, utilizing weightlifting is the most optimal way to develop muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue, right? So I get this question sometimes, like, is that weightlifting? Like, no.
Although he talks about, and I can't think of the term he uses it, but he talks about guests come to stay with him and he gets them to put on a heavy backpack and go out for a bit of a hike. So carrying a big load can help, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. So rucking essentially is a form of resistance training, but it's also a little bit of cardio, it's general movement. When I say resistance training, I mean progressive overload over time. So week to week to week, you would add a little bit more weight to whichever exercise you're performing. So one of the best exercises to perform are the compound types of movements, right? So deadlifts, squats, hip thrusts, and bench press, which utilize almost your entire body, right? So in order to deadlift a significant amount of weight, and everybody's different, right? So when I say heavy weights, that does not mean 500 pounds. It means heavy weights for you, right? So wherever you're at in your fitness journey, in your strength progression, starting there and then adding a little bit. So maybe 5 to 10% week to week, every week, adding a little bit more because that's what stimulates muscle growth. That's what stimulates strength progression. That's what stimulates the development of muscle tissue. So, yeah.
So Pilates is not enough.
Pilates is great. Yoga is great, walking is great, cardio is great, but it's not the same, right? So exercise is a very broad umbrella term. Exercise means all these things. but they're not necessarily conducive or optimal for building muscle tissue, right? So cardio is for cardiovascular health. Steps are great for general overall movement throughout your day, right? So you want to be in motion as much as possible, not sitting. Walking and swimming, bicycling, all of these things, but they're not the same as very targeted, optimized strength training specifically with progressive overload. It's a different category.
What do you wish, every woman over 40 knew? What do you wish we know? Because I know you talk a lot about hormones and all sorts of different things and perimenopause and all of that. What do we need to know?
This is one of my biggest pet peeves. When women say it's menopause that is creating this problem, right? It's perimenopause's fault that I have gained 30 pounds. It's menopause's fault that I feel this way or that way. And my response is yes, absolutely. You are going through a biological, hormonal, physical change. However, your behavior pattern is what's determining the end result here, right? So I give some examples, right? So let's say you have a teenager in your household and that teenager is going through a somewhat of a perimenopausal phase, right? Like things are
All at the same
changing.
time.
Yes, right? So hormonally, everything's changing. Physically, things are changing. Everything's different. Everything's changing. Would you tell that teenager, hey, I think this is a good time for you to eat as little as possible, to do 2, 3 hours of cardio every day, and to sleep as little as possible, right? That's probably a terrible idea. Now, imagine you have a pregnant woman in your household. Same type of situation, right? So, pregnant woman going through extreme hormonal changes, physical changes, emotional changes, lifestyle changes, all these things. Would you tell that woman the same thing? Would you say, hey, maybe, we don't need to sleep 7 hours, 8 hours. We can just make it on 3 hours and we can, run for an hour and then do some more cardio and then eat as little as possible. Just eat a little salad. Just, not, you don't need any protein. You don't need carbs. You just need as little food as possible. What's going to be the end result of that? So if these things are bad ideas, why do we do them during perimenopause and menopause and then blame the period of time that we're in, that is the problem?
Mm. I hear a strong message of accountability and of our own behavior. And you and I, you had a situation where you were hospitalized several times, so a fairly dramatic wake-up call. I had breast cancer, a fairly traumatic breakup, kind of wake-up call as well. What's the message to people who haven't had a wake-up call? Because we don't want everyone to end up in hospital or end up in that situation before taking accountability. And if it was really easy, everyone would be doing it. So it's like, how do we just help people with that?
That is a great question, and I don't have the answer
Mm.
because I feel like a lot of times, in order to make such significant changes, we need to be at our wits' end. It has to get so bad that we don't have a choice.
Mm.
And that's the unfortunate part about being human, right?
Yeah.
Is that the long strategy, the long plan is not enticing enough to the brain to say, well, I need to make these changes right now in the present time immediately because in 30 years I want to be climbing Mount Everest. The brain just doesn't work like that. And so a lot of times being at the very bottom is sometimes what it takes to make such significantly profound changes. And unfortunately, more and more people nowadays are finding themselves in the obesity category. But because obesity is such a silent killer, and because the behavioral changes and the new habits are so difficult to implement, the medical system does not know how to handle it.
Yeah. I hear a very strong message in there of being prepared to seek help. And I did when I didn't know where to turn, and to learn new behaviors and all sorts of things. I also saw a holistic coach. I also saw a yoga teacher. And I remember the yoga teacher saying something to me that was really fascinating. And it was just the point of saying that she wanted to be able to tie up her own shoelaces at 85. It's not a bad goal, right? So of all the things to kind of aim for. But Terry, incredible conversation. I always ask all of my guests, given the name of the podcast, what does brave feminine leadership mean to you, and do you think it needs to change?
Brave feminine leadership. Mm. Great question. So, in my experience, to be bravely feminine means to embrace all parts of ourselves. We don't need to be men in the workplace in order to be successful. We don't need to act differently than what we actually feel like. We don't need to go so far outside of who we are in the workplace that we lose sight of our own femininity, personally or professionally. And I feel like that disconnection a lot of times is what creates this unhappiness, a very deep unhappiness with a lot of professional women because they have been led to believe that they have to leave their femininity at home or bury it somewhere deep down inside and never let it never come out if they want to be successful in this world. And I would like to see more women bring their full selves to their lives and to their workplace.
Mm. Fabulously said. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, Terry. We could have gone on for hours. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Melissa. It was my pleasure. I really loved it.